the H200 certainly is one of Nvidia's more advanced chips. It's much more advanced than the H20, which to date has been the only chip they've been allowed to sell to the Chinese market as well, which has been really interesting. The question for me, I think, is not so much, and hasn't been this much, whether Nvidia is allowed to sell to China, because it has been since, April or so. It's more, will China want those chips, or indeed will Beijing allow its companies to buy the chips? And I think that's really here the big question in all of this. So if we think about the first part, whether China will allow or Chinese companies will even want to buy these chips, we have to look back to some of the commentary we've heard throughout the year. Jensen Huang said in earlier this year that Huawei's current products are actually equivalent to the H200, which begs the question, if there is a domestic equivalent to the H200, why would Chinese companies want to buy Nvidia chips? The other part is when Nvidia was allowed to sell the H20 to China, Beijing was on a big drive to tell its local companies and discourage them from buying H20s. And we hadn't seen any H20 sales, even though Nvidia was allowed to do so. The other part of the equation is we listened to Chinese tech giants' earnings calls this season, and a lot of them were saying they've been able to develop very good AI models on a mix of Nvidia chips they already had, plus domestic alternatives. And so what you are seeing is advances on the domestic chip side. So that begs the question, do these Chinese companies even want to buy and rely more on Nvidia, particularly at a time when China is pushing self-sufficiency and domestic alternatives? However, there is clearly a big shortage of chips, and we heard that from a lot of the Chinese tech giants on the earnings call. So this now opens more of a market and allows them to get their hands on these chips. And the performance of the H200, that might be a bit difficult for these Chinese companies to resist the temptation. So you could see a situation in which they may stockpile these chips. And I don't think this is going to be a point where China all of a sudden goes back all in on Nvidia. Absolutely not. But there will be a push towards domestic alternatives as well.